Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari.
Life of Giovanni Antonio Sogliani, painter of Florence. Very often do we see in the sciences of learning, and in the more liberal of the manual arts, that those men who are melancholy are the most assiduous in their studies, and show the greatest patience in supporting the burden of their labours, so that there are few of that disposition who do not become excellent in such professions. Even so did Giovanni Antonio Sogliani, a painter of Florence, whose cast of countenance was so cold and woeful that he looked like the image of melancholy, and such was the power of this humour over him that he gave little thought to anything but matters of art, with the exception of his household cares, through which he endured most grievous anxieties, although he had enough to live in comfort. He worked at the art of painting under Lorenzo di Credi for 24 years, living with him, honouring him always, and rendering him every sort of service. Having become during that time a very good painter, he showed afterwards in all his works that he was a most faithful disciple of his master and a close imitator of his manner. This was seen from his first paintings in the church of the Osservanza on the hill of San Miniato without Florence, for which he painted a panel picture copied from one that Lorenzo had executed for the nuns of Santa Chiara, containing the Nativity of Christ, and no less excellent than the one of Lorenzo. Afterwards, having left his master, he painted for the church of San Michele in Orto, at the commission of the Guild of Vintners, a Saint Martin in oils, robed as a bishop, which gave him the name of a very good master. And since Giovanni Antonio had a vast veneration for the works and the manner of Fra Bartolomeo di San Marco, and made great efforts to approach that manner in his colouring, it may be seen from a panel which he began but did not finish, not being satisfied with it, how much he imitated that painter. This panel remained in his house during his lifetime as worthless, but after his death it was sold as a piece of old rubbish to Sinibaldo Gaddi, and he had it finished by Santi Tita dal Borgo, then a mere boy, and placed it in a chapel of his own in San Domenico da Fiesole. In this work are the Magi adoring Jesus Christ, who is in the lap of his mother, and in one corner is his own portrait from life, which is a passing good likeness. He then painted for Madonna Alfonsina, the wife of Piero de' Medici, a panel picture that was placed as a votive offering over the altar of the Chapel of the Martyrs in the Camaldolite Church at Florence, in which picture he painted the crucifixion of San Arcadio and other martyrs with their crosses in their arms, and two figures half covered with draperies and half naked, kneeling with their crosses on the ground, while in the sky are some little angels with palms in their hands. This work, which was painted with much diligence and executed with good judgment in the colouring and in the heads, which are very lifelike, was placed in the above-mentioned Camaldolite Church, but that monastery was taken on account of the siege of Florence from those eremite fathers who used devoutly to celebrate the divine offices in the church, and was afterwards given to the nuns of San Giovannino, of the Order of the Knights of Jerusalem, and finally destroyed. And the picture, being one which may be numbered among the best works that Sogliani painted, was placed by order of the Lord Duke Cosimo in one of the chapels of the Medici family in San Lorenzo. The same master executed for the nuns of the Crocetta a Last Supper coloured in oils, which was much extolled at that time. And in a shrine in the Via dei Ginori he painted in fresco for Taddeo Taddei a crucifix, with Our Lady and St. John at the foot, and in the sky some angels lamenting Christ, very lifelike, a picture truly worthy of praise, and a well-executed example of work in fresco. By the hand of Sogliani also is the crucifix in the refectory of the Abbey of the Blackfriars in Florence, with angels flying about and weeping with much grace, and at the foot the Madonna, Saint John, Saint Benedict, Saint Scholastica, and other figures. For the nuns of the Spirito Santo, on the hill of San Giorgio, he painted 2 pictures that are in their church, one of Saint Francis and the other of Saint Elizabeth, Queen of Hungary, and a sister of that order. For the company of the Ceppo he painted a banner for carrying in processions, which is very beautiful, representing on the front of it the Visitation of Our Lady, and on the other side San Niccolò the Bishop, with 2 children dressed as flagellants, one of whom holds his book, and the other the 3 balls of gold. On a panel in San Jacopo sopra Arno, he painted the Trinity with an endless number of little boys, Saint Mary Magdalene kneeling, Saint Catherine, Saint James, and 2 figures in fresco standing at the sides, Saint Jerome in penitence and Saint John, and in the predella he made his assistant, Sandrino del Calzolaio, execute 3 scenes, which won no little praise. On the end wall of the oratory of a company in the township of Anghiari, he executed on panel a Last Supper in oils, with figures of the size of life, and on one of the 2 adjoining walls, namely the sides, he painted Christ washing the feet of the apostles, and on the other a servant bringing 2 vessels of water. The work is held in great veneration in that place, for it is indeed a rare thing, and one that brought him both honour and profit. A picture that he executed of a Judith who had cut off the head of Holofernes, being a very beautiful work, was sent to Hungary, and likewise another in which was the beheading of Saint John the Baptist, with a building in perspective, for which he had copied the exterior of the chapter house of the Pazzi, which is in the first cloister of San Croce, was sent as a most beautiful work to Naples by Paolo da Terrarossa, who had given the commission for it. For one of the Bernardi also, Sogliani executed 2 other pictures, which were placed in a chapel in the church of the Osservanza at San Miniato, containing 2 life-size figures in oils, Saint John the Baptist and Saint Anthony of Padua. But as for the panel that was to stand between them, being dilatory by nature and leisurely over his work, lingered over it so long that he who had given the commission died, wherefore that panel, which was to contain a Christ lying dead in the lap of his mother, remained unfinished. After these things, when Perino del Vaga, having departed from Genoa on account of his resentment against Prince Doria, was working at Pisa, where the sculptor Stagio de Pietrasanta had begun the execution of the new chapels in marble at the end of the nave of the Duomo, together with that space behind the high altar, which serves as a sacristy, it was ordained that the said Perino, as will be related in his life with other masters, should begin to fill up those adornments of marble with pictures. But Perino being recalled to Genoa, Giovanni Antonio was commissioned to set his hand to the pictures that were to adorn the aforesaid recess behind the high altar, and to deal in his works with the sacrifices of the Old Testament, as symbols of the sacrifice of the most holy sacrament, which was there over the centre of the high altar. Sogliani then painted in the first picture the sacrifice that Noah and his sons offered when they had gone forth from the ark, and afterwards those of Cain and of Abel, which were all highly extolled, but above all that of Noah, because some of the heads and parts of the figures in it were very beautiful. The picture of Abel is charming for its landscapes, which are all well executed, and the head of Abel himself, which is the very presentment of goodness. But quite the opposite is that of Cain, which has the mien of a truly sorry villain. And if Sogliani had pursued the work with energy instead of being dilatory, he would have been charged by the warden, who had given him his commission and was much pleased with his manner and character, to execute all the work in that Duomo. Whereas at that time, in addition to the pictures already mentioned, he painted no more than 1 panel, which was destined for the chapel wherein Perino had begun to work, and this he finished in Florence, but in such wise that it pleased the Pisans well enough and was held to be very beautiful. In it are the Madonna, St. John the Baptist, St. George, St. Mary Magdalene, St. Margaret, and other saints. His picture, then, having given satisfaction, Sogliani received from the warden a commission for 3 other panels, to which he set his hand, but did not finish them in the lifetime of that warden, in whose place Bastiano della Seta was elected. Perceiving that the business was moving but slowly, allotted 4 pictures for the aforesaid sacristy behind the high altar to Domenico Beccafumi of Siena, an excellent painter, who dispatched them very quickly, as will be told, in the proper place, and also painted a panel there, and other painters executed the rest. Giovanni Antonio, then, working at his leisure, finished 2 other panels with much diligence, painting in each a Madonna surrounded by many saints. And finally, having made his way to Pisa, he there painted the 4th and last, in which he acquitted himself worse than in any other, either through old age, or because he was competing with Beccafumi, or for some other reason. But the warden Bastiano, perceiving the slowness of the man, and wishing to bring the work to an end, allotted the 3 other panels to Giorgio Vasari of Arezzo, who finished 2 of them, those that are beside the door of the façade. In the one nearer the Camposanto is Our Lady with the Child in her arms, with Saint Martha caressing him. There also on their knees are Saint Cecilia, Saint Augustine, Saint Joseph, and Saint Guido the Hermit, and in the foreground a nude Saint Jerome, with Saint Luke the Evangelist, and some little boys uplifting a piece of drapery, and others holding flowers. In the other, by the wish of the warden, he painted another Madonna with her son in her arms, Saint James the Martyr, Saint Matthew, Saint Sylvester the Pope, and Saint Turpie the Chevalier. Having to paint the Madonna, and not wishing to repeat the same composition, although he had varied it much in other respects, he made her with Christ dead in her arms, and those saints as it were round a deposition from the cross, and on the other crosses, planted on high and made of tree trunks, are fixed 2 naked thieves, surrounded by horses and ministers of the crucifixion, with Joseph, Nicodemus, and the Marys, all for the satisfaction of the warden, who wished that in those new pictures there should be included all the saints that there had been in the past in the various dismantled chapels, in order to renew their memory in the new works. One picture was still wanting to complete the whole, and this was executed by Bronzino, who painted a nude Christ and 8 saints. And in this manner were those chapels brought to completion, all of which Giovanni Antonio could have done with his own hand, if he had not been so slow. And since Sogliani had won much favour with the Pisans, after the death of Andrea del Sarto he was commissioned to finish a panel for the Company of San Francesco, which the said Andrea left only sketched, which panel is now in the building of that company on the Piazza di San Francesco at Pisa. The same master executed some rows of cloth hangings for the wardens of works of the aforesaid Duomo, and many others in Florence, because he took pleasure in doing that sort of work, and above all in company with his friend Tommaso di Stefano, a painter of Florence. Being summoned by the friars of San Marco in Florence to paint a work in fresco at the head of their refectory, at the expense of one of their number, a lay brother of the Moletti family, who had possessed a rich patrimony when in the world, Giovanni Antonio wished to paint there the scene of Jesus Christ feeding 5,000 persons with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, in order to make the most of his powers, and he had already made the design for it, with many women and children and a great multitude of other people, when the friars refused to have that story, saying that they wanted something definite, simple, and familiar. Whereupon, to please them, he painted the scene when Saint Dominic, being in the refectory with his friars and having no bread, made a prayer to God, when the table was miraculously covered with bread, brought by 2 angels in human form. In this work he made portraits of many friars who were then in the convent, which have the appearance of life, and particularly that of the lay brother of the Moletti family, who is serving at table. Then, in the lunette above the table, he painted Saint Dominic at the foot of a crucifix, with Our Lady and Saint John the Evangelist, who are weeping, and at the sides Saint Catherine of Siena and Saint Antonio, Archbishop of Florence, a brother of their order. All this, for a work in fresco, was executed with much diligence and a high finish, but Sogliani would have been much more successful if he had executed what he had designed, because painters express the conceptions of their own minds better than those of others. On the other hand, it is only right that he who pays the piper should call the tune. The design for the miracle of the loaves and fishes is in the hands of Bartolomeo Gondi, who, in addition to a large picture that he has by the hand of Sogliani, also possesses many drawings and heads painted from life on tinted paper, which he received from the wife of the painter, who had been very much his friend after his death. And we also have in our book some drawings by the same hand, which are beautiful to a marvel. Sogliani began for Giovanni Serristori a large panel picture, which was to be placed in San Francesco dell'Osservanza, without the Porta a San Miniato, with a vast number of figures, among which are some marvellous heads, the best that he ever made. But it was left unfinished at the death of the said Giovanni Serristori. Nevertheless, since Giovanni Antonio had received full payment, he finished it afterwards little by little, and gave it to Messer Alamanno di Jacopo Salviati, the son-in-law and heir of Giovanni Serristori, and he presented it, frame and all, to the nuns of San Luca, who have it over their high altar in the Via di San Gallo. Giovanni Antonio executed many other works in Florence, some of which are in the houses of citizens, and some were sent to various countries, but of these there is no need to make mention, for we have spoken of the most important. Sogliani was an upright person, very religious, always occupied with his own business, and never interfering with his fellow craftsmen. One of his disciples was Sandrino del Calzolaio, who painted the shrine that is on the Canto delle Murate, and in the hospital of the temple, a Saint John the Baptist who is assigned shelter to the poor, and he would have done more work and good work if he had not died as young as he did. Another of his disciples was Michele, who afterwards went to work with Ridolfo Ghirlandaio, whose name he took, and likewise Benedetto, who went with Antonio Mini, a disciple of Michelangelo Buonarroti, to France, where he has executed many beautiful works. And another, finally, was Zanobi di Poggini, who has painted many works throughout the city. In the end, being weary and broken in health after having been long tormented by the stone, Giovanni Antonio rendered up his soul to God at the age of 52. His death was much lamented, for he had been an excellent man, and his manner had been much in favour, since he gave an air of piety to his figures, in such a fashion as pleases those who, delighting little in the highest and most difficult flights of art, love things that are seemly, simple, gracious, and sweet. His body was opened after his death, and in it were found 3 stones, each as big as an egg. But as long as he lived, he would never consent to have them extracted, or to hear a word about them.